Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 2021 Educators Ag Institute. I'm Cassidy. I'll be your host for today. So first, we would like to thank our sponsors. You can see the wide variety that we have on the screen. We also have a little bit of a couple housekeeping things. There is a pretest. The link is in the chat box. If you have not already done that, please take the pretest. It helps us, it helps our presenters know how much you're learning, and it's also required if you want ACT 48 hours. Now, for the duration of the session, we cannot hear or see you. Attendees' audio and video is off. However, there is a chat box. Please be respectful, but if you want to send a chat to everyone, make sure it says panelists and attendees. So it's really important if you want to send resources to other attendees. Now, we will have a Q&A session. So throughout the session, if you want to ask a question from our presenters, please put it in the Q&A box so that at the end we can make sure we get to everything. Now, with that, our first actual session is a beef tour with the Pennsylvania Beef Council. So let's welcome Nichole, Kaitlyn, and Marty. And first, we will be watching a tour of Marty's farm, but we want to see what you feel about the beef industry so far at the beginning. So we have a poll. If you could share your perception surrounding beef and how cattle are raised, that would be very helpful to all of us. Okay. Have a couple more. All right, let's get your final couple votes in. Okay, so we're looking at what we have our current perceptions about beef and how cattle are raised. And we will take the same poll again at the end of the session. So first, we will be watching a video tour of Marty Yahner's beef cattle farm. So let's switch over to that.
Yahner from Yahner Brothers Farms. We farm near Patton and Hastings and Carrolltown in northern Cambria County. Right now we're at our farm at Loretto, where this is the barn where we start our young feeder cattle. My brother and I, Rick, are the 6th generation of Yahners, since my great-great-great-grandfather came over from Germany in 1829 and settled here around the northern Cambria County area. And so I like to say we all stand on the shoulders of those that came before us, and that's very, very true with Rick and I and our family, because this barn was originally built in 1962, I think, by my grandfather when he was in business, as a chicken barn, and they produced broiler chickens. And my grandpap was also very innovative and raised hogs and got into the cattle business in 1960. We still are in the cattle business now, bigger than before. No longer chickens or hogs anymore. But as I said, this barn, we start our young feeder cattle, so we don't have cows. So feeder cattle or feeder steers, we buy them when they're like a year old. They're called yearlings. And we get them from the guys that have the cows in Virginia and West Virginia. And they're delivered by, we buy them by trailer load lots, and they're delivered here. We start the cattle here at this barn. When I say start, that means they come off pasture for the most part. So we start them and get them acclimated to a different feed ration. We feed corn silage. which is the whole plant of corn silage, chopped, blown onto trucks. Trucks are delivered to the silos, which you'll see later, and that's what we feed as the base ration. It's the whole plant corn silage, the plant and the grain. And then we just feed a protein and vitamin and mineral supplement to give them a balanced, nutritious diet. And so we start them here and quarantine them. And that was before COVID. It's always a good management practice too, because when you bring new animals into a farm, biosecurity is very important, no matter what animal you're talking about, no matter what species. So we quarantine them at this farm for a minimum of 3 weeks, and sometimes a couple months or more, and then we'll move them on our own truck from this farm to 12 miles from here to the Patton farm, the home farm where I live, which you'll see more later in this video. And that's where we finish them. That's where we feed them up to slaughter weight, which is typically 1,400 pounds. We buy them when they're about 700 pounds, usually 700 to 800 pounds, and then we grow them up and feed them until they're ready for slaughter weight. And so that takes, like, you know, some animals grow faster than others, so 6, 8, 9, 10 months. So by the time we sell them, there are very few of them are more than 2 years old, and that's good. So they're young. So at this barn right here was a converted chicken house. It was a broiler house where we were in the chicken business for about 20 years. Well, whenever we converted this barn to feed cattle, we built the silos, we built this roof right here. The chicken barn was standing here before. This roof was put on to keep the rain and the snow off of this feedlot, to keep the manure in here so it didn't get into the waterways, because there's a lot of places where, you know, if the cattle are out in the elements and there's not a roof over it, you know, when it rains and snows, the manure can get into the water, and that's not good. So this roof is a best management practice, a BMP, that we got cost share money, and we have that at our Patton home farm too, which I'll also show you later. And so this was a perfect case of government incentive, doing the right thing for farmers, keeps the manure in here, it's better for the farmer, the cattle are healthier, keeps the waterways clean. It's a win-win-win situation. Cost share money, best management practices. Instead, we feed whole plant corn silage that we chop with a forage harvester and fill these silos. And that's the basis for our feed ration. And so these two silos here, you know, we'll feed this amount of feed every year to the cattle we start here. And at the home farm, we have 4 silos, which you'll see later. And then these feeders carry the feed. There's a silo unloader inside the silo unloader. The feed comes down. We blow it up these pipes right here with a silo blower to fill the silo. And in the fall, when the corn is ripe and ready. And then the unloader blows it out and it comes down this chute and goes out to the feeders to feed the cattle. And then we have a feed bin inside with the protein and vitamin mineral supplement I told you about that we hand distribute. As the feed goes out to the bunk, we put that in at the right rate to get them a right balanced ration. So this is the feed bunk at this barn where we start to feed our cattle. where the feeder is overhead here and the feed comes in from the silo, and it's called a taperboard feeder. So it's a chain with a conveyor, and it's tapered so the feed drops out as it goes across the bunk, so it fills the bunk. I have the same kind of feeder at my home farm. And this is the corn silage. As you can see, it's very finely chopped corn, the whole plant and the grain and the kernels. And we actually, even on the forage harvester, there's what's called a kernel processor, which is feed rolls that run at an extremely fast speed, and the silage goes through it, and it actually crimps the kernels and crimps the stalks even more to make them even more highly digestible. So it's very digestible. It's wonderful feed for cattle. Okay, now welcome back to Yahner Brothers Farms at the Patton Home Farm, where I live, where my ancestors settled. You had seen the farm where we start the feeder cattle at the Loretto Farm. Well, now we're at the farm 12 miles from there near Patton. And in the background there, the house, that's the old farmhouse that my great-grandfather built in 1870, and I live there today, as my parents and grandparents did before. And that's our big grain facility, because I may mention we farm 2,500 acres, over 19 air miles, 6 different townships. So we're a fairly large acreage farm in Pennsylvania, as well as feeding cattle. So we raise corn and oats and wheat and hay, soybeans. So you see those big grain bins, that's what we store grain in, that we sell as a cash crop that we don't feed to the cattle, the corn and the oats and wheat and soybeans. But anyway, so I guess we'll just walk around, but that's what I wanted to show you where I live. So over here, we'll just walk over here and we'll see, I'll show you the cattle barn that my grandfather built in 1960. It's a feedlot because, as I said, we do not feed cattle on pasture. We buy them from the men that have the cows and feed calves on pasture. Our cattle, we buy them, as I said, when they're yearlings, about 700 or 800 pounds, and we finish them on cement in a feedlot. They have an open barn, and you'll see more later, where they can go in under the roof or out into what's called a feedlot. We feed about 450 to 500 per year. We sell to JBS and Cargill, but we also sell a lot of freezer beef. Anyway, what I wanted to show you is this barn in the back was built in 1960, but this big roof is a freestanding roof, like at the Loretto farm that I mentioned, that we were able to get cost share money from the government, which is a great best management practice. It keeps most of the rain and snow out of the barn, off of the cattle. It keeps the manure then contained inside, so it literally doesn't run out when it rained and snowed. So for 40 years, this outside part you see where the fence goes around, that's where the cattle were open to come out anytime they want and spend their days and nights out here, but it was open to the elements. So the rain and snow obviously could make the manure turn to soup. So we would always haul manure, constantly, a little bit at a time, to keep that from happening. because it's just a best management practice to keep the manure in the barn so you can then gather it and spread it on the fields as needed, or rather than have it go down into Chess Creek, into the Susquehanna River, and into the Chesapeake Bay. So best management practice, very, very important. A good incentive to farmers to do, and a good cooperative effort for the good of all, for the environment, for the farmer, for everybody. Okay, as I said earlier, we put and fill our silos. Here at the home farm, we have 4 silos. They're 24 feet in diameter and 60 feet high, not counting the steel roof. And we fill them every fall with feed, which we feed that much to the cattle each year. This structure back here, you can see, is made out of cement at the bottom. That's called a bunker silo. And that we filled and still can, but we haven't in a few years. But that is a bunker silo. So you can fill that with silage, and many farmers do, and you pack it with tractors, with heavy tractors, to pack the silage as you put it in there, and that would hold 54, 55, 60 truckloads of our size truck, which would be half the amount of each one of these silos. And you would cover this with plastic, and then feed off of that as needed throughout the year. And that was another way that we cattlemen feeders feed silage. Put a roof over it called a coverall, made by Coverall Building, and we turned it into an equipment storage, hay and straw storage, but it's still, we could still use it for a silo bunker if we wanted to. Nothing high-tech or fancy about our farm, but it works. This is the feed room, where we have silos, obviously, on both sides, and there's an underground conveyor that brings the feed from the back 2 silos back on the other side of the driveway. And this is called a Rissler feeder. I think it was patented by a Mennonite in Martinsburg by the name of Edwin Rissler, and he sells all kind of feeders. But anyway, obviously, here's the chute that the silo unloader brings the feed, throws the silage out of the silo, and it comes down this chute and into the feeders. These doors, you can see this silo still has feed in it. That silo is empty, so you can see the doors are open. So, you know, as we feed the silo down, you open the doors and move the chute, because the unloader has a blower that it blows the feed out. There's an auger, and the machine goes slowly around, and it blows by a blower out the chute and comes down. You know, put a chute here and puts it into the feeder. The feed then comes out, and as I said earlier, we feed a vitamin and protein supplement at the rate of 2 pounds per head per day, and this is a purchase feed. And we have a bin, a steel bin on the outside of the feed room, and so nothing high tech here, but it works. We feed the proper number of pounds of this per day, blended into the feeder as the feed's going out this conveyor, and then the cattle have a 24-hour buffet. The feeder is 110 feet long, our bunk is 110 feet long, so a good many a cattle can feed and eat anytime they want, 24/7, which they do. So we feed, well, our farm where we start cattle, my brother takes care of those, my brother Rick and his boy Ben, who may be the 7th generation Yahner to farm. That's the plan anyway. Ben's 21, I think. But I feed about 3 or 4 times a day here. And so these cattle are bigger than the ones at the Loretto farm, because as I said, we move them from there down to here and get them up to slaughter weight. What you're looking at right here at the video at this moment, these cattle are not quite ready for slaughter, but some are getting close. We typically move them when they're about, 1,400 pounds, but it depends by the animal. Some go earlier and some go heavier and some go lighter. We sell them, I choose by eyeball and experience when they're ready, when they're choice grade. There are different grades. The cattle, USDA grading, you might know, there's prime, which is like the highest, which is a premium price. Many of our cattle do make prime. The vast majority make choice or high choice. And then there's lesser grades called select and whatever. But the vast majority of our cattle make choice grade, which is what we want. And you might notice the ear tags, and some ear tags are different than others.
It's because we do not put tags in their ears. Those are the tag that was put in them by the cow-calf operation, the guy that has the cows, the females, and the bulls and whatever, and they put those tags in to identify them for their purposes at their farm. I like the fact that they have tags because then I can tell by the tag who I got them from and when, but we don't put tags in ourselves. Let's see what else. As I said, the cattle are all on cement, but they can go in the main barn or out here as they like, and we use a lot of straw. Straw is when we cut our wheat and oats, we harvest those for the grain. The straw is the stalk, and we bale all that and use that as bedding because it's a very dry and it's absorbent, and we use that as the bedding for them to lay on. And in the dry, hot summer months, we don't need to use as much straw for bedding. But in the winter months, when it's colder and wetter, we have to use a lot of straw for bedding. So it gives them a dry place and warm place to lay. And then, as needed, we haul the manure out with a skid loader or front end loader and load the manure on manure spreaders or trucks and haul it out to the fields and various fields where we spread it as it's needed because it's a great manure. Manure is a great fertilizer. So we want it's a waste product, but it's good fertilizer. It's handy because it keeps the manure drier, and then we can literally load it on trucks and haul it farther away from the farm so all the manure doesn't get spread close to the barn. It's a better management practice. You don't put too much manure on the land. We put what the crops need. Yeah, so let's see. Here you're looking into the barn there. It's called a pole barn because an aluminum barn built in 1960. My grandpap actually he went out west because back then this was a very innovative way to feed cattle. He went out west and saw how got this idea to build this pole barn, open front, open to the south facing. Those openings never close. In the wintertime, I have portable curtains that I can put down to keep the snow from blowing in there because we live on top of the mountain here at some of the highest elevation in Pennsylvania here in northern Cambria County. We're about 2,300 feet elevation, so we're some of the highest points so we get the highest points in Pennsylvania, so we get some high winds here in the winter and it can really blow and snow, so we try to keep the snow out of the barns. And it has big doors on each side of the barn on both sides, and to the south and to the north, that we can open and close accordingly. But for the most part, you leave it open because cattle, nature designed cattle to live outside, all their lives, of course, nature, whether, cattle, buffalo, whatever. And so you don't want to close up a barn too tight. They're healthier when they have fresh air at all times. Inside here in the Patton Home Farm, those are round bales of straw. They're 5 feet in diameter and 4 feet this way. But anyway, those are round bales, and that's what we use for the bedding. And when we fill this alley and fill this barn, the alleyway here, we can put about 400 round bales in here that we use a lot for bedding, as I said, for the cattle. But we sell a lot too to other farms, like dairy farms. We sell bedding to them. But the dairy farmers also feed some straw as well, a little bit, like a pound per head per day to their milk cows. What that does is it adds bulk and it slows down their rumen, it slows down their digestive system, so it's more efficient utilization of their feed. So actually, straw doesn't really have any nutritional value, it's just more of a fiber. But that's what we sell a lot as well as use it for bedding. But yeah, so this is a shot of the inside of our pole barn at the home farm where we finish the cattle. And it's, like I say, just open housing, another term for it. They can go anywhere they want. The water trough is over at the other end where they get access to good, clean, cool drinking water at all times. And that's very important with any livestock operation. And you can see they're happy and they're healthy and they're standing around. They chew their cud, and because they are cud chewing animals, they have 4 chambers to their stomachs, or 4 stomachs. The rumen, the abomasum, the omasum, and the reticulum. And each compartment of the stomach does a different process to break down roughage and fiber that we as monogastrics with one stomach can't. And that's what's great about cattle. They can utilize and grow on feed, grass and forage and corn stalk, silage, like I said, that we humans can't. So when you hear about cattle using land that could be growing food for humans, that's just not true. It just frankly isn't true. Rangeland and pastures and the western states where cattle graze, it's better for the environment. They're using feed that can't be used for anything else, and can't be used for humans. Rangeland, it won't grow anything else. It doesn't get enough rain, barely enough for even pasture. So like in Virginia and West Virginia where we buy these cattle, those guys down there, they have mountain meadows, they call them, or pastures, that literally the soil's so poor it won't even grow trees. But it's good for pasture, and that's where they raise cattle because that land isn't good for anything else. So the cattle industry utilizes land that can't be used for anything else. I guess it could be said that we raise cattle and have since 1958. My brother and I, as I said, we stand on the shoulders of those that came before us. And we feed cattle, I guess you'd call it conventionally, the conventional way. Not to be called organic or natural. Technically we're not. I kind of don't even like those terms because, as I said, we're the 6th generation, and what we're doing with our crops and field crops and the cattle, if it wasn't sustainable, we wouldn't be able to stay in business. And farmers are businessmen. We first are a business, but it also is a way of life. But so our cattle are not called natural or organic because those are hoops you have to jump through to attain those terms. Not criticizing those in any way. Milk and other products are advertised and sold as natural or organic, and that's fine. The customer's always right, and if the customer wants those things, wants to pay more for them, that's fine. I guess a lot of farmers like myself believe that, and it's true, that if we were forced to produce everything natural or organically without pesticides and whatnot, and chemicals of any kind, a lot more people around the world would starve and food prices would be a lot higher because the production is less, and that's why the cost is higher. But I know dairymen that are selling organic milk and it's for a high price, but that's great, so I don't want to call it a niche market because it's probably growing, and that's fine. The customer's always right. But we feed our cattle the conventional way, and everything is, obviously USDA and FDA approved, and it works for us. Okay, so as you see, most of ours are black and white face. They're Angus. There's a few reds or grays sprinkled in there too when we buy them. Many of you might know in the supermarket, you might have seen in the supermarkets advertised a certified Angus beef, CAB. Well, that's a marketing program, but it's the customer's always right. That's what the customer and the packers want. So that's what we produce for them. Angus is a beef breed. High percentage of the carcass, is actual meat. Where dairy farms, you've seen those black and white cows, those are mostly Holstein. They're a better dairy animal. They produce more milk for dairymen. That's why the vast majority of cows are Holsteins. So dairy industry in Pennsylvania still continues to be, I think, the largest portion of animal agriculture in Pennsylvania on dollars of revenue generated. I believe 25% of our state's beef meat comes from the dairy industry. So dairymen obviously produce milk. That's their primary commodity that they sell, but they're in the beef business too. Another thing I wanted to touch on or tell you about is the BQA, Beef Quality Assurance Program, which is a national program, and Pennsylvania very involved in it with the Pennsylvania Beef Council, very involved, and I participated
in meetings where it's a great program where, as the name says, quality assurance, whether it be the quality of the animal, the quality of the beef, the quality of the housing, the quality of the handling, the quality of the transportation of animals, it's all encompassing. So it's better for the industry, better for the consumer, the whole BQA program.
Okay, well this is the pole barn, like I said, that my grandpa built in 1960, and where we finished the cattle. And I guess in case you can't see, my hat says "Beef, it's what's for dinner." That's the slogan of you know, beef promotion. So I thank you all who are watching this video and taking part in this Ag Educators Institute. Thank you very much for taking part. It's very important, and that the public and the non-farm public knows and learns about agriculture, and this is just one way. So the Educators Ag Institute is a program from Pennsylvania Farm Bureau, as you well know, and it's great that the Pennsylvania Beef Council is coordinating to have this, and I appreciate being asked, because it's very good and a very good thing for farmers to advocate for agriculture. We know that in this nation, about 1% of the people are farmers, maybe even less than that now, actual production agriculture, involved in agriculture. So it's very, very important that educators like yourself can maybe instill a little bit of appreciation into your students about where their food comes from, because it's really a sad reality in our society today that just by ignorance, and I mean that in the best way, people don't know where our food comes from. They're mistaken. You know, chocolate milk doesn't come from brown cows, things like that. And where beef really comes from. I've said it for the last year, because we sell a lot of freezer beef, and I've sold a lot of freezer beef direct to customers through local butchers in the last year than we did in the previous 20, and that's good. The American people, maybe because of the pandemic, has learned the fragility of our food chain and how one link can break in our food chain and supermarket shelves can go bare real fast, and that's not good. So, you know, we in Farm Bureau and farmers like myself, we know, and the consumers need to know, we don't have enough packing plants. We don't have enough food processing facilities in this nation. We need more, not less. So when a handful of packing plants do 85% of the beef processing in this nation, and one plant goes down by a fire or COVID, it influences your price that you pay for beef in the supermarket practically immediately. So that's not good. So it's good that the consumer wants to buy local from local farmers, not just beef, but any commodity, and with local butchers, local businesses. That's a good thing. So hopefully you'll take that home and instill that in your students.
Okay, so you got to see a nice tour of Marty's farm. Now we'll actually get to talk with Marty in person, ask him all kinds of questions. We are also joined with Nichole and Kaitlyn from the Pennsylvania Beef Council. So I will turn it over to them for our question and answer session.
Sure. Well, I just want to thank everyone for joining us here early on a Monday morning. And thank you, Marty, for opening up the farm, really to bring educators to the farm to learn more about the beef industry in Pennsylvania. So if you have questions pertaining to, I know Marty shared the wide scope of what he does daily on the farm to ensure quality beef, but we're happy to answer those questions. And now's a great time, as he mentioned. So many of you are, don't experience the farm day to day. So this is really an opportunity to ask the hands that feed the cattle every day on how your beef is raised, any questions that you might have. And I'm also joined by Kaitlyn Swope, who's on the line here as well. And she's going to take you through kind of a beef basics one-on-one on more of the beef itself after the farm. So we will have more questions then. But as of right now, as I'm looking into the chat box, Marty, all it's saying right now is, you know, they were, one lady was very impressed on how content the cattle were. Is that normal on the farm? Pretty quiet, typically, when you're visiting the barns?
Yes. Hello, everyone that's on here. Thanks for joining us and thanks for watching this video. As I said, it's very important that farmers advocate for agriculture and tell the true story. So, yes, cattle, it's always best, and that's what they want to be. They want to be, and we like them to see them quiet. If you hear cattle making noise, that means they're afraid of something, or they're hungry, or concerned, or something wrong. So the more quiet and content, just like you saw them, is exactly the way we want our cattle to be. I'll just throw a couple other things out because, you know, after I did the video, I remembered some things I should have said or whatever. So just in no particular order. Terminology. The cows are the females that have had calves. Heifers are females that have not yet had a calf. Bulls are intact males, and steers is what we feed. They've been castrated. They were castrated when they were very young by the guys that have the cows. And the reason why, you know, the beef industry castrates bulls and makes them into steers is because it makes them more docile, less wild, better tasting, more tender beef. Another thing is the supplement that we feed is mostly a soybean meal. That's what's most of the ingredient in that soybean supplement I showed you. And another thing was, you might have noticed real quick when we walked in the feed room at the old home farm, when Kaitlyn was filming inside the feed room, you might have noticed real fast, we just walked right by it, there were some bags, paper bags on the feeder there. That's sodium bicarbonate and trace mineralized salt. And those two things are kept, we feed cattlemen, we put them in a self feeder that the cattle can take a lick of them at any time. They have free choice to those two things, sodium bicarbonate and trace mineralized salt. It's just, it gives them more minerals if they want it. And the bicarbonate is, like, you know, probably it's an antacid. So if they feel like they might have an upset stomach, they take a lick of the sodium bicarbonate, and it makes them feel better, which they don't use much of that. So those are just some things I thought about it say.
Sure. There are actually some questions coming through. So I'm going to start at the top of the order, if that works for you. The first question coming in on what is the reason or rationale to cattle being kept on cement?
Okay. As I said, it's called a feedlot. It's just because in order to feed, well, let's put it this way. Okay. Let me back up. You might have seen pictures in the Western states, Texas and those big states where most of the cattle are finished. They're in gigantic feedlots where we have maybe 500 cattle on feed at one time. That's the maximum we have at one time. Well, they have that many in one pen and out west, but the pens go on for as far as the eye can see. And because they get very little rain, so they don't even need a roof. And they're fed by trucks, where the trucks drive along, and the feed bunk is what's called a fence line feed bunk. And the cattle have access to water, of course, but it's a dry lot, and it rarely rains. And so that's where most of the cattle are finished. But here in the east, we get too much precipitation, too much snow and rain. So we got to give them a roof. And if you try to finish cattle on, you know, without cement, you just have a bunch of mud. And so that's not good management, of course, because the mud and everything gets into the waterways. So it's better management practice to, like I said, contain the manure in a feedlot.
Thank you. Another question that came in is this: they saw windmills in the background. Can you explain any alternative forms of energy that is supplied to the farm?
Those wind turbines they were built by EverPower, but they were previously, now they've been sold. But anyway, that wind farm was built. It's a 15 megawatt farm. There's 15 turbines, each at 2 megawatt. It's called the Patent Wind Farm. I was the local developer for 3.5 years back in 09 to 2012. The company sort of kind of hired me. I was their local name and face. We have 2 of those turbines on our property, but a bunch of them, like 6 or 7 of them, are in land that we rent from other neighbors. And that was, really nothing to do with our farm, but it's just, I believe, and see, I got a little wind turbine there behind me on the shelf, but I believe we need all the energy sources we can get in this nation. And so the energy from those wind farms goes into the grid, and it goes wherever the power is needed. So they're big.
Thank you. Another question that came in is, can you explain how you keep the cattle feed from molding in the silos?
Oh, okay. Good question. Yeah. So the whole the physics of silage and forage is so obviously air. Anybody who knows anything about science, it takes oxygen to oxidize, and so you put it in. Forage is wet, so it's typically 60 to even 70% moisture. It's fairly wet. You got to get the right moisture content in the silo. And it has to be drier at the bottom and a little wetter at the top. Here's why. Because if gravity and just the weight of the silage compresses itself by gravity and excludes the air, so the air is pushed out. And so it goes through a fermentation process. Silage has to go through that fermentation process, which makes it silage. So it can't mold, and it doesn't rot. It's an anaerobic versus an aerobic. It's an anaerobic process. And that's what makes silage smell sweet and really good. And and in the silo bunker, you might have heard me say, when we pack it with the tractors, it's because we have to pack it to get the oxygen out of it. And then you cover it with plastic and throw tires over it. I didn't say that. We have hundreds of tires that you cover that plastic to keep the air out. And then you only expose and roll the cover back just as fast as you're going to feed it. And the bigger the feedlot and the more cattle you feed, whether you're a dairy or a beef operation, the more likely the cattle are going to be fed out of a bunker silo, because then you just need a tractor to load it, front end loader, and the feeders. You don't need all the silos and the unloaders and all the stuff like we have to have. But there again, in the east in Pennsylvania, we got a lot of snow, we got a lot of rain. So unless you're a really big operation, most of the silage is still fed through silos. Upright silos, that's what they're called.
Thank you, Marty. The next question, I know that you spend a lot of time on the farm and really just evaluating cattle. The question is, how can you tell if a cow or an animal is sick on the farm, and what happens when you identify that animal?
Oh, it's sick?
How can you tell an animal is sick?
Okay.
That was the question. And then what are the next steps once you identify an animal is sick? Okay.
Good question. Yeah. So by eyeball, when you saw the animals yourself there, that's the way they're supposed to look. The telltale sign by a cattleman, dairyman, anybody that has cattle or any livestock for that matter, you can almost tell by looking at them, because when they're bright-eyed and clean nose and erect ears and they're alert and all that, that's good. If you see an animal with its head down, ears drooping, literally looks tired, runny nose, just like a human, you can tell by looking they're sick. So that you might have heard, I remember we quarantine our animals. So we get them, and so we quarantine them, obviously. And because if they're going to get sick, the chance is it's going to be in that first 1, 2, 3 week period. So that's why we keep them at the farm at Loretto, where my brother Rick lives, my partner, before we bring them here to finish them. So we don't bring disease here. That's biosecurity. That's what that's called. And it's very, 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 very rare that I get a sick animal here at the Patton Home Farm where I live. And it depends on the weather. We get our cattle in the summer and the fall, and we really like to get them before November, because when you get that warm, cold weather in the fall, people get sick, right? It gets warm, it gets cold, people can get colds and flu. Well, animals are the same way. So we got to watch them real close. If they get sick, we have we're set up at the Loretto farm and here with what's called a squeeze chute, where we can pick the animal out that's sick, get it into what we call a sick pen, where they can be quarantined, fed and watered separately, and we can catch them in a head gate where you can catch them individually, holds them, that you can give them medicine, whether it be a shot or a pill that you can give them in their mouth, and that usually cures them, and then you turn them loose.
Great, thank you. So the goal is not to have any sick animals, and it sounds like you do a great job with that.
That's right, that's the goal.
Mm-hmm. The next question is regarding slaughter and processing. I know that you just feed cattle on your farm. There is no processing on your facility. So the question was a clarity on that. So if you could just reconfirm that. And then secondarily is if you're not processing on the farm, why do cattle have 840 tags that tie into premise ID? So can you explain the need or rationale for a tag and why that's important when it leaves your farm, again, from a food safety standpoint?
Okay, so the tags, like I said, the cattlemen that have them before us, the cow-calf operator, they put their own tag in. Some have the, for lack of a word, I'll call the computer chip or whatever. The ID that stays with it its whole life. Some operators don't have that. It's not mandatory in all animals, so it isn't, but it's optional. So let's see, where was I going with that? So, oh, processing. So yeah, we feed the cattle, and so when we sell freezer beef, the customer calls me. I advertise in newspapers and online and social media and whatnot, and especially since the pandemic, people want to buy local. And a lot of people are calling me and saying, I want to buy local and I want a deal. You know, I don't want to go Walmart or anywhere else anymore, you know? So, so we coordinate with the customer, with the local butchers, various ones that I deal with, and we deliver the live animals to the butcher. And then the customer talks to the butcher or the office coordinator at the butcher shops and tells them exactly how you want it processed. And you can have your order, whether it be a quarter beef, a half, or even a whole. And that's how we sell it, by the quarter, half, or whole, by the hanging weight. That's the carcass, the sides of beef hanging in the cooler that you've seen on TV. They call it a side because it's split down the middle, and there's a left side and a right side. So typically, you know, a whole carcass weighs 800 pounds, a half weighs 400 pounds. And then if somebody wants to buy a quarter, it's about 200 pounds. That's the hanging weight. And I charge $2.50 a pound, and I have charged that same price for years. And so you, the customer, when they talk to the butcher, you can have it processed exactly the way you want. And that's between you and the butcher, and that's more and more people are doing that, and that's great.
Yep.
I'm always looking for more customers.
And just to kind of hit home on the tag purpose, the purpose of a tag, I know that you don't put tags in the cattle ears when you receive them, but really we, you know, in beef quality assurance, we emphasize that ear tag is kind of like the birth certificate, if you will, that stays with the animal its entire lifespan. So that would be the reason or the rationale of utilizing a tag. When the animal ends up going to a processing facility, those ear tags are obtained and kept from a food safety standpoint, so they can then trace back to the farm if ever needed, just
Right.
to kind of further answer that question.
Right. As a matter of fact, okay, so I mentioned in the video, I sell to JBS and Cargill. So there's various ways I can do that. You know, those big packing plants kill, what, 1,700 head a day, I think. They're getting back to normal. I guess they have the capability of doing 2,000 head a day, but, you know, some of the biggest plants east of the Mississippi. But anyway, here in Pennsylvania. But yes, so whenever I sell to them, I can either deliver to a local, what's called a buying station, or auctions, where they can buy them there if they want in competition. Or what I also do is I'll make a deal with the buyers for Cargill or JBS, and they'll send a tractor trailer here, and I can sort 37 head. They'll take up to 37 head direct from my farm right to the plant. And then I can be paid either different ways, by on the pound, by the hoof, how I negotiate, or by how they grade. Remember the grades I told you about: prime, choice, select. And of course, there's discounts if they're, you know, lower grades, and premiums if they're higher grades. And then there's a base price, which is choice. But anyway, so yeah, so whenever I get my check, if I sell them grade and yield, that's what's called, grade and yield, depending on how the USDA grader grades them on the carcass individually in the plant when they're hanging. The USDA grader looks at everyone, grades everyone. When I get my sheet, I get a report of how they grade, and they actually have the ear tag numbers with the carcass, with that animal. So yeah, it goes purpose of identification. You can trace it back to the farm, which is good.
Yep. Okay, Marty, I have two questions that I'm going to sort of morph into one because I think that they kind of tie in together. So the questions are regarding antibiotics. I know that you talked about the goal is really to ensure there are no sick cattle, but when there are, can you share what your protocol is for using antibiotics? Can you also share the amount you would say, the percentage of cattle that you treat? And then third question, I can remind you of these three questions are, do you use any added hormones? And if so, why?
Okay. We can advertise our beef truthfully as antibiotic free because 1%, a half of a percent of our animals actually get sick that we have to give them a shot of antibiotic to make them lower their fever and get them back on feed and make them feel better again. And that's when they're young, months and months and months before they're sold. So those antibiotics are through their system in a couple of weeks, I think, a month at the most. So we definitely advertise as antibiotic free, which they are. So about half to 1% actually maybe get sick and get a shot in good years. In a good year, ideally, none, 0%. And like I say, that depends on the weather, because if we get a load delivered in and maybe it's snowing and cold on the day they're delivered or something, and warm or cold over, yeah, they can get a cold, they can get sick, they can, they look like they're off feed, we can tell. And so that's when we'll catch them and give them a shot. Anyway, so it's only, depends on the body weight. So for a 700-pound steer, it's 40 milliliters, I think. In a couple, you give them a couple of vials, a shot in a syringe, only 40 milliliters is all you give them one time, and that's usually it. And it fixes them up, and they're better. Sometimes we'll give them aspirin, just a big pill with a special called a bowling gun, because the big pill is called a bolus, and you put it in, and then you put it in their mouth because they're in the head gate. You can put their head around, you grab their head and stick it in and give them a shot, give them a pill, and they just take it like an aspirin, which it is. It's aspirin. That lowers their temperature. So what was the other part of the question?
Well, just to add to that, can you explain, on the back of the bottle that you might be using, or the aspirin that you might be using, there's a withdrawal time. And so can you explain, how you use that and to ensure that cattle are not going to processing or a processing facility when they are within that withhold time?
Oh yeah, I'm pretty sure the withholding time on most drugs, which, like I say, obviously FDA approved, have been for decades. Oh yeah, I think the withdrawal time says 45 days. Well, like I said earlier, we're giving them in their months until they get, from the time they give a shot, if they get a shot, till they're slaughtered. So it's not an issue. Oh, as far as hormones, natural, one of the qualifications you have to do to be considered natural is you don't give the implant. It's called an implant. And when they're little, you can, FDA approved 30 decades ago. There's different kind of implants. You put you have a special gun, gives them a shot in their ear. You put it behind their ear, under the skin, under the cartilage of the ear. So it's a time-released hormone that lasts only 45 or 100 days at the most. It's a growth promotant. It's a natural hormone. The one we use is called estradiol. It's like an estrogen type. It's called estradiol. It only lasts 100 days. So it's out of their system long before they're slaughtered. But what it does is it gives better feed efficiency and improved rate of gain. So if you don't do that, you can be called natural, but we've penciled it out, and it's an economics thing. The payback, the increase in growth rate, pays for it, because the implant only costs like $1 or $1.50. But anyway, so it's or maybe $4, I think it was. But anyway, so it's yeah. So that's a management decision.
Thank you, Marty. Anyone has any additional questions about that, you can just type it in the Q&A box. But looks like we have about 7 minutes, and there are 4 questions left, so that are currently in there. So I'm going to combine 2 questions. This one are regarding solar energy. So does your farm use solar energy? And then the secondary question from that is there's lots of research going on regarding energy powered by cattle waste. Do you participate in any conservation programs like this?
Okay. We don't have any solar panels on our property. I have looked into it. It could be, and I still may someday. We looked into years ago building our own 10 megawatt wind turbine ourselves on a 120-foot tall lattice tower. And I tried for like 3 or 4 years to get cost share money to do that, to put it right on the hill above my house here, you know, to use net metering and use power that we can produce ourselves, and then whatever we produce that we don't use could go back into the grid, and we get, it's called net metering. You can do that with solar. I've looked into that. I could. Sometimes it's just a matter of not enough hours in the day, but there is a lot of hoops to jump through. It's a complicated process to get the cost share money and all that and do that, but it's great. Farmers do, homeowners do. I encourage it. It could be done. We have big buildings with south-facing roofs. We could do that. Oh, biodigesters. Yes. So a biodigester uses manure, and big dairies and big cattle operations, especially dairy farms, I know some, I have friends of mine that have them, where they use the manure. It produces methane, and the methane gas then is used to drive a diesel engine, and it runs a generator and runs electricity. So then they can power their farm, and they are set up with net metering that they can get money back into the grid. And so that's a great thing. I know I have friends that do that. I just haven't done it. We could, but I haven't.
Thank you. The last 2 questions that I have currently, the first one being, you explained the difference between your farm or breeds, if you will, with beef type animals and dairy. Can you describe some of the differences between a dairy farm and a beef farm that one might observe, besides having the milking parlor? So maybe it's, you know, how do you observe these, you know, as you're driving down the road, or what might the daily care might look like?
Okay. Well, if you're driving down the road to the non-farm public, you might not be able to tell the difference. Upright silos, bunker silos, barns, I'm talking about here in Pennsylvania. You might not be able to tell the difference just by driving by, unless a sign out front tells you it's a dairy. More likely the dairy would have pasture, where you might see cows, the black and white Holstein breeds that I talked about, or their heifers, or their dry cows. Those are the cows that are in the process, they're in the part of their life they're not giving milk. That's why they're called a dry cow. They could be out on the pasture, yeah, and that's more likely. Now, don't get me wrong, in Pennsylvania there's beef cow herds and plenty of cattle where you can drive by and see the Black Angus, their mamas and the calves walking around the pasture. Sure, you'll see that too. Does that answer the question?
I think so. So I would say breeding type, your black and white Holsteins, and there's lots of other various breeds. Those cattle, which are more dairy type, their height and their stature make them a dairy type. Again, as he noted, they're more suitable for milk production,
Right.
although it can be used for beef. And then versus beef type animal, you know, those are the bigger indicators. And then you know, pasture, but again, cow calf operations on beef would also be on pasture. So hopefully that answers the question. Yeah. And then the last question that's in here is, do you have any annual contracts with the processor? Do you see beef being more vertically integrated like pork and swine in the future?
That's a good question. In the video you heard me say, my grandfather was a very diversified potato farmer back in the 50s and 60s. Well, no, he got out of the potato business before I was born in 1959. But he was the largest potato grower in Pennsylvania with 350 acres in the 1950s. That was like unheard of, but with 100 laborers to pick the potatoes. But anyway, so he got very diversified. We had 250,000 broiler chickens on feed at any one time, year round, for 20 years. They were on 9 weeks. We buy the day-old peeps. 9 weeks later, you had the 4 or 5 pound bird. We also were at the same time in the 50s, 60s, and 70s and 80s and into the mid 90s We were in the feeder pig business where we would buy the young feeder pigs with 40 pounds and finish them to slaughter weight of 250 pounds. A lot of reasons why we got out of that. Those two species went vertically integrated. And now, what, 90 or 95%, maybe more percent of the pigs and chickens in this nation are vertically integrated, where the farmer might own the buildings, but literally doesn't own the animals. The feed company maybe owns the animals, and the farmer works on a contract with get paid by the head that they produce, and incentives with feed efficiency and things like that. And that's how the farmer gets paid. Cattle have not done that for a lot of different reasons. The life cycle of cattle being such that the life cycle, the gestation period for cattle is so much longer than chickens or pigs, obviously, that's part of the reason why vertical integration really hasn't happened in the cattle industry. I don't see it happening anytime soon. It's just the nature of the beast, I think. So cattle are more independents like me. Now, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of cattle where feeders, especially in the western states, the men that have the feedlots, they custom feed cattle too and don't really own the cattle or only partly own them, but not nearly like the chickens, poultry, and hogs and turkey.
Okay. Well, thank you. On my end, that appears like that is all of the questions. I'll let Cassidy take back over. Thank you for your participation.